Great empires are not forged purely in blood, they are sustained by calories. A force of 100,000 soldiers on the move is essentially a vast, hungry city in motion, and hunger claimed more Roman lives than enemy blades ever did. That is precisely why Rome engineered a supply network that, by ancient standards, bordered on the miraculous. Without modern freight trucks or high-speed rail, moving food at continental scale seems unthinkable. Yet Roman quartermasters managed it daily, calculating routes and resupply windows with the kind of mathematical rigor we now associate with modern distribution algorithms. The Roman military was not merely a fighting force. It was a finely tuned resource processing machine, converting raw grain into battlefield dominance, day after relentless day. Each legionary consumed roughly a kilogram of grain per day. Meat was secondary, often viewed with suspicion among the infantry, who found that heavy protein diets drained their stamina on long marches. Slow-burning carbohydrates kept blood sugar steady across hours of grueling movement. Modern sports science calls this carb loading. The Romans arrived at the same conclusion through brutal trial and error at the cost of countless soldiers' lives. A force of 100,000 men required around 100 tons of grain daily, a figure staggering even by today's supply chain standards. Rather than distribute ready-made bread or hardtack, each unit received raw, unmilled grain. The soldiers ground it themselves each evening using heavy stone hand mills, baking unleavened flatbread over campfires, or cooking a thick porridge called pulse, seasoned with salt and a drizzle of olive oil. It looked like mortar, but it delivered the calories needed to rebuild strength after a punishing day's march. Grain quality was enforced by dedicated military inspectors. Spoiled or infested supplies were immediately discarded. A sick soldier was far costlier than a wasted batch of wheat. Officers ate the same rations as ordinary troops during active campaigns, a rule that reinforced discipline and erased the class tensions that might otherwise fester in an exhausted army. The standard drink, a blend of water and cheap sour wine, served a dual purpose, quenching thirst and neutralizing bacteria from questionable water sources. Moving 100 tons of food each day demanded a logistics fleet of its own. The Roman army depended on pack animals as completely as a modern force depends on motorized transport. Ox-drawn wagons were too slow, so the sturdy, unassuming mule became the backbone of ancient supply lines. It combined the strength of a horse with the natural endurance of a donkey, and ate far less than cavalry mounts. For every 10 soldiers on campaign, at least one loaded mule marched alongside. These animals could carry roughly 100 kilograms each and cover up to 30 kilometers a day over rough terrain. Caravans stretched for kilometers behind the marching columns. Each squad was personally responsible for its assigned animal. Losing a pack mule was treated as the loss of state military property. Beyond grain, the mules hauled leather tents, hand mills, and construction tools. Without that cargo, soldiers could not erect a fortified night camp. Wheeled carts existed but were reserved for heavy artillery and senior commanders' equipment. They frequently shattered on rocky roads. The mule went where carts could not. Romans understood the difference between maneuverability and raw load capacity, and chose accordingly. Permanent supply infrastructure was just as critical as mobile transport. Rome constructed massive stone granaries across its expanding territory, engineered with raised wooden floors for ventilation, rodent protection, and moisture control. Under such conditions, grain could remain viable for up to 2 years. Modern grain elevators operate on the same passive circulation principles, a testament to how well ancient engineers understood basic physics. Warehouses were positioned so that an army on the march moved from depot to depot, each roughly 5 days hard marching apart. This freed soldiers from carrying a year's worth of food on their backs. Garrisons of experienced veterans guarded each facility around the clock. Inventories were conducted monthly with the thoroughness of a modern tax audit. Base commanders controlled which legion received fresh stores and which received older supply, authority that made them among the most powerful figures in Rome's military hierarchy. Corruption was punished with public execution. Theft from a military warehouse was classified as treason. Overland transport was slow and expensive. A grain wagon consumed part of its own cargo just feeding the animals that pulled it. Ships, by contrast, moved thousands of tons using nothing but wind, at almost no incremental cost. Rome invested heavily in both a merchant fleet and a river patrol network. Flat-bottomed barges plied the Rhine and Danube continuously, guarded by armed marines who repelled attacks with deck-mounted catapults. The Mediterranean itself posed serious seasonal constraints. From November through March, storms made open-water navigation suicidal. Generals had to stockpile massive winter reserves in advance. A miscalculation meant starvation for isolated frontier garrisons. Port workers and dock laborers worked in shifts to meet these deadlines, loading standardized clay amphorae and leather sacks at a pace that rivaled modern mechanized terminals. The Hill of Monte Testaccio in Rome, an artificial mound composed entirely of broken amphorae, stands today as a monument to that staggering volume of trade. Piracy was a persistent existential threat. Rome spent fortunes maintaining fast war galleys not out of moral concern, but because a clear sea lane was the direct precondition for feeding soldiers on distant frontiers. No logistics network is immune to reality. Torrential rains washed out roads, storms capsized grain ships, and enemy raiders burned warehouses. When supply lines failed, the army shifted into organized self-sufficiency. Half the legion held the camp, while the other half conducted frumentatio, structured, disciplined food-gathering sweeps of the surrounding countryside. Foragers moved in full combat gear and tight formation, since scattered groups were prime targets for local resistance fighters. They located buried grain caches using barely visible surface disturbances, probing suspect ground with iron spears. Every edible item was surrendered to the Legion's collective stores, concealing even a small amount of food carried immediate physical punishment. The survival of the collective was placed unconditionally above any individual's interest. Enemies countered with scorched earth tactics, burning fields and poisoning wells. This left Roman forces with nothing to forage, forcing a grinding halt to any offensive momentum. A logistical crisis paralyzed commanders more effectively than any enemy stratagem. Behind every march, every battle, and every siege was an army of clerks. Roman quartermasters tracked grain quantities on wax tablets and papyrus scrolls with bureaucratic obsession. Each 8-man squad, the contubernia, received its rations from a duty quartermaster who logged every transaction. Officers audited grain weight daily. Any clerk caught issuing short measures was stripped of his post immediately. This accounting system gave commanders a precise, real-time picture of how many days of food remained, which in turn dictated the timing of maneuvers and pitched battles. Operational planning was built entirely around the arithmetic of available food. The Romans understood, long before the phrase existed, that logistics is strategy. Discipline held as long as bellies were full. When rations shrank, centurions lost authority, soldiers ignored orders, and the threat of mutiny materialized rapidly. Decimation, executing every 10th soldier, was sometimes the only tool remaining to restore order. But executions did nothing to refill the grain sacks. At the most desperate extreme, pack mules and horses were slaughtered for meat, dismantling the very transport network the army needed to move tomorrow. History records the names of generals and the outcomes of battles. It rarely honors the quartermaster who kept 100,000 men fed across 30 days of hostile terrain. Yet the Roman supply system was arguably the empire's greatest engineering achievement, more consequential than the roads, the aqueducts, or the legions themselves. Celtic and Germanic tribes could muster fearsome fighters, but when the food they'd gathered ran out, their armies simply dissolved and went home. Roman legions could hold position for months, waiting for the precise tactical moment. The straight stone roads that tourists admire today were built first and foremost for supply wagons, not marching soldiers. Rome's dominance was not the product of individual heroism or superior weapons alone. It was built on meticulous accounting, durable infrastructure, and the unglamorous labor of mule drivers, dock workers, and clerks. Famine topples empires. Bread and reliable roads make them last. Rome understood this better than anyone, and the evidence is still visible in the foundations beneath every road they ever paved.